Correct. I want to talk about North Korea. Whilst we were overseas, what's going on with North Korea? He was supposed to be making a deal with North Korea. Some people say he's only trying to do that because he wants to get a Nobel Peace Prize because Obama's got one. That's why he's pushing this deal with North Korea. And somehow North Korea just fired off some. Your thoughts?
That might be true. He is that mentally ill. He's a malignant narcissist. Do you understand? Malignant narcissist is a category of mental illness. It's not a social category. You know, if Tom Selleck is a malignant narcissist, it comes out in his movies. But, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Most people in Hollywood are, in fact, narcissists. They have to be. But Donald Trump is a malignant narcissist, and he holds the reins of power, and they're not going to censure him for what he's already said. If they're not going to censure him for what he's already said, then do you understand what I'm saying? The lid is off, and somebody at the top, the deep state, the real men that run the largest monopoly corporations that are taking over the bloody planet, banking, industry, defense contracting, those men are, of course they are, a secret society. What? Do you actually think they wouldn't be? They wouldn't do it? You know, every time Donald Trump is photographed sitting, you see that little hand symbol that he makes? It looks like a little upside-down triangle he does with his hands. Do you understand what that is? He thinks he's communicating to the third degree of the Blue Lodge of Freemasonry. He makes that little Masonic symbol everywhere he's photographed because he thinks he's speaking to the elite, because he thinks he's one of them. Do you understand a third-degree Mason is the bottom of the rung? It's where unemployed electrical workers are. He's not an elitist. He's a joke as a Mason. He's a silly person, and it's an accident that he's in the White House. But that does not mean that the Dick Cheneys don't know how to use him.
And I guess he doesn't mind being used either then. Because he's got to know he's being used.
Every time Donald Trump sits down, he says, "What's in it for me?" He'll do anything you ask him to do. He'll change that's why he changes positions to the point where Pentagon officials and retired military are coming out public. 70 of them just came out public and said, how can we go to war with Iran when the president can't find it on a map? How are we going to go and defeat Iran on the ground when we logistically are spread on 3 continents and we only have 400,000 troops in the U.S. Army? This man is out of his mind. But that doesn't mean that Dick Cheney wouldn't be perfectly comfortable seeing the United States Army defeated in the field, and this nation state and its sovereignty goes with it. Because that is the plan of the corporate empire. They hate American sovereignty.
But Craig, having said that, though, what do you see for the economy? Because people are saying that the economy is going to go bust either after 2020, after 45 is reelected. That's when the economy is going to go south. Could they mention because of what's happening overseas and all these trade tariffs that he's putting up, and also the budget deficit? Do you see that in the future as well? And what do these corporate giants feel about that?
No. They're all fiat currencies throughout the entire world. Why do you think they got the Democrats and the Republicans to sit down with this idiot in the White House that can't even read and write, let alone read and write a book on economics or monetary policy or fiscal stability? They sit down with these people and they go, okay, here's the model legislation. I know this for a fact. They sit down with what is called model legislation written by lawyers at Boeing, Lockheed, Salomon Brothers. They write the legislation, they pass it off to a staffer, and the congressman pretends that he wrote it and signs off on it, and he hasn't even read it, because none of them care. What they care about is this going to keep me in office if we do this? They just sold the country out. A $1 trillion deficit and a budget that is so ridiculous it could never be repaid. and that bought and paid congressmen and Democrats and Republicans. How do you think they pulled that off out of nowhere before the next election?
Hold that thought right there, Craig. We got to take another short break. I'll let you finish that thought on the other side, right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Thanks for staying with us, folks. And our guest, the geopolitical analyst, his name is Craig Hulet. One of the calls speak to Craig is 800-450-7876. Craig, before you I'll let you finish your thought. But tell us, how does the immigration issue develop in all of this, what you're saying about the multinationals? Because the immigration issue is not just in the United States, it's all over the world. It's immigration problems. So how does that fit? Who's supporting it, and why can't it end?
Okay, well, it's like somebody at Bloomberg, because Trump was saying that he was gonna sanction China, and that he was sick of China taking Americans' jobs, and there's these mobs of ignorant people with John Deere baseball caps on, crooked, are going, yeah, all right, you're gonna bring jobs home to America. China hasn't taken any jobs from America. U.S. multinational corporations have taken jobs from Americans and sent them overseas working for subsidiaries of their own. Ivanka Trump does it. Everybody's doing it. And China isn't the worst one. The worst are right there in Mexico. They're called maquiladoras. When NAFTA was created, I was working with Jack Metcalf. Yes, it was secretly. But later on, it came up, I wrote Jack Metcalf speeches. And when we opposed NAFTA and the agreement, it was because it had nothing to do with helping Mexico. It was to release the southern borders U.S. multinational corporate offices called maquiladoras. There were 6,000 maquiladoras in Mexico operated by U.S. multinational corporations. NAFTA was to set them free so they didn't have to pay a duty from Mexico to Canada to traffic in U.S. goods produced by Mexicans. They're called maquiladoras. I'm the one that came up with the statistics that Jack Metcalf used when he argued both on radio with me, on the show with him. I would bring him to the host that interviewed me, and they would interview Jack. Of the 51 largest economies in the world, the United States being the largest, 51 are multinational corporations. Of all the trade, the international trade between countries, you think are countries. You think it's between Mexico and America, China and America, Brazil and America. You think we're doing business with coffee bean makers in Brazil. You're wrong. 45% of all international trade is between Bonn of Germany, Detroit of Michigan, General Motors of Detroit and Bonn, Ford Motor Company of Detroit and Bonn. Now, repeat that 145 times in different nation states, and that's the global economy, and it doesn't have a damn bit to do with you. That's why when Donald Trump said that 6 million new jobs were created, he was lying. When he said that the centers for the immigration where the children and families that are separated and they're being held in places like one of them where the Japanese were held during World War II has been open to hold so-called illegal immigrants. Right. You know what he said during his speech? He said that they were paradise. There was air conditioning and good food and beds. There was paradise for these immigrants. This man lies for a living. He doesn't know what the truth is, and he doesn't care. He should be removed from office, but do you understand what I'm saying? They don't need a president in the White House. None of this would be happening if Jeb Bush was in the White House. None of this would be happening. Because Jeb Bush is one of the elite's own, and he would have governed the United States on a track of global empire for the corporations, but he would never have fouled the American nest the way Donald Trump is. Donald Trump was not handpicked. He was not selected to be president. Nobody wanted him there, especially the elite that control our politics here domestically, and man, the largest multinational monopoly corporations. They had no interest in Trump. It was an accident, and that means they're fallible. The elite that run this corporate regime are fallible. But like I said 30 years ago, when I first introduced this concept to the audiences in America on radio, television, internationally, Al Jazeera, everywhere I did for 35 years, I always said, this is what the plan is. And somebody would say, well, Hulet, like, they're not going to succeed, man, because, like, the Green Party is going to, like, save us. And I would say, look, these men are the smartest, best educated, wealthiest men on the planet, and they hire the best minds from Harvard, MIT, like Noam Chomsky at MIT. And it isn't a question about whether or not they win. The question is, they will try. And in that effort, they will destroy this economy, this culture, everything that is right and good about this country since its foundation. With Thomas Paine, get off the founding fathers shtick, will you? That's called historicism, and you're wrong to apply America's principles today to historical figures of 200 or 300 years ago. This country and its Constitution opened the door to defeat monarchies and tyrannies worldwide. And yes, there were white men fighting against slavery before Frederick Douglass was ever born. Get your head screwed on straight. This ought to have been the greatest nation on earth, and the democracy and the free republic should have spread all over the world. But like crazy old Lyndon LaRouche said, do you actually think monarchies give up? Do you think the American dream was ever going to be allowed to be transferred to the African continent, Indonesia, Middle East? You don't understand the human race. You don't understand elitism. You don't understand politics if you think this ever had that kind of a chance. The requisite for this country to succeed throughout the world is set men, women free, gays, lesbian free, blacks, whites, Korean, Asian, Mexican, Hispanics, because they're not all Mexican. Some of them are called Hispanics. Was the only hope was in you and me, the people of the country. We let this slip.
Right, Craig. I want to touch on Iran. What's going on there in the Straits of Hormuz? They seized, allegedly seized a tanker, a British tanker. And that's where a great portion of the oil that's for the rest of the world comes through. Is there going to be a showdown there? I mean, I guess they're facing off with the Brits, but is Trump going to get involved there? Is he going to help his new friend who's now running Britain?
Donald Trump doesn't do anything. Others tell Donald Trump what's going to happen, and he's told, this is what you're going to say when you say it, and hopefully he says it right. But if you look at the back cover of my book, The Hydra of Carnage, it was before 9/11. I started writing it, and in it, the central target of the 7 nations that later Wesley Clark also said that he determined were the targets of our Anglo-American invasion of the Middle East. Target was first Iraq, and then Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, but the real target the whole time. And it had a name. It had an operation that was in place under the Clinton administration. It was called the Silk Road Strategy. I talk about it in The Hydra of Carnage. And if you look at the cover, so you don't have to buy the book, just go to the website and take a look at the picture on the back of my book, and you will see that this has always been about Iran. The Saudis and Israel are in bed with the United States and Great Britain, France reluctantly, little bit Germany, but all of it was planned to take over the entire Middle East and ultimately eliminate Iran and seize control of all of the oil in the region. But the most important part are pipelines. And it includes water. Go look at a map of Iraq and look at the two rivers. Go look at the map on the back and you will see all of the proposed and existing pipelines. But look at the ones that are proposed. It surrounds Iran and neutralizes the nation, making it ripe for total economic disaster, and then ultimately they can be taken militarily. All of this was planned. Yes, you could call it a conspiracy that goes back to before the Clinton administration. Of course there's a conspiracy to take over countries like Iran. Of course there's a conspiracy to get rid of Libya and Muammar Gaddafi. Of course there are. Do you think politics in the real world has ever been without criminal conspiracies? Every criminal prosecutor knows them. They're called RICO Act. Conspiracies all the time abound throughout the world. Epstein is, in fact, the head of the largest criminal conspiracy ever, trafficking in little boys and little girls, pedophiles, men and women both. You need to grow up about the way the real world works. This isn't about Iran and Trump. You could put Howdy Doody in fact, we did. We put Howdy Doody in the White House, literally, with the puppet and the strings and the silly face and the ridiculous hair. That's all he is. He's a puppet. He's an idiot. Hillary would have also been a puppet and an idiot, but not Jeb Bush. He's one of their own. The conspiracy was supposed to see him elected. But they'll run a Democrat.
Right there. Right. Hold that thought right there, Craig. We've got to take another short break. And when we come back, Dwayne wants to know if the opium fields factor into the same issues you're talking about with oil in Iran. Folks, you too can join us. Reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Speak to Craig Hulet. We'll take your calls after the short break right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.
Back to the Carl Nelson Show. Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL Radio.
Thanks for rolling with us, folks. And our guest, the geopolitical analyst, his name is Craig Hulet. The number to call to speak to Craig is 800-450-7876. Just want to remind you that before we get back to Craig, the TV judge Joe Brown is going to join us tomorrow. So if you're in the DMV, tell all your friends to keep their radios locked on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. Craig, I'm going to let you finish your thought. When you finish that, Dwayne is tweeting us and he says he wants to know if the opium fields will factor into the oil issue as well.
Okay, I didn't hear the first part. I just got the last part about the opium fields.
I'll let you finish what you were saying before we cut you off at the last break. And then if you could tell us about, Dwayne wants to know about the opium. He says, do the opium fields factor into that also?
Without question. I've got over 100 pictures of U.S. military personnel, special forces, family members, Marines, guarding the opium poppies in Afghanistan. We're protecting them. Afghanistan had completely stopped all opium production prior to 9/11. The Taliban that was in power before 9/11 had stopped all opium production. In fact, that very week, they were getting an award. It was in Foreign Affairs Journal. They were getting an award for defeating all opium production and turning all of the country into profitable food products for themselves and for export. After 9/11, they were quite simply told, and I'll quote, you'd have to do your own research, but I quoted it, it's in my book. They were told, if you don't make the pipeline for Unocal and all of the corporations that have been negotiating what I previously called the Silk Road strategy under the Clinton administration, if you do not go along with the pipeline and eliminate Iran from their pipeline, then we will bomb you into the Stone Age. They said no, and we bombed them into the Stone Age, and we're still killing the Taliban and calling them terrorists. But opium now is the largest export coming out of Afghanistan once again, and it's financed almost exclusively by U.S. dollars. We bribed the local warlords. We helped help them. Hamid Karzai's brother was the head of it. Hamid Karzai, the president, for 17 years. I love this. The democracy called Afghanistan. He was the president for 17 years while we were killing everybody that got in the way. All of the good people of Afghanistan are being slaughtered because they stood their ground and said, no, we are not going to allow you to put a pipeline through our country without compensating us to defeat Iran on our western border. We have no fight with Iran. So we slaughtered them by the millions, and we continue to slaughter them, and we call the Taliban the enemy. Every year, Hollywood makes a movie and makes the Taliban the enemy of America. They even hint still that they did 9/11 with bin Laden. And everybody that's thinking on the planet knows that Saudi Arabia did 9/11. And instead of shutting Saudi Arabia down for killing 3,500 Americans working at the World Trade Center, we gave them $60 billion under Trump. The same week, we gave $60 billion to Israel under Trump. We did the same thing under Bush Jr., Obama, and Clinton. And you still think there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans. You still think there's conservatives and there's liberals. Do you think we would have an opiate crisis if the drugs weren't coming in by the boatload? What was the largest cocaine bust in world history just took place 2 weeks ago? It was an accident. Customs Border Patrol stopped it. They shut it down. They caught the largest cocaine bust in world history. But it was an accident. Guess whose boat it was? J.P. Morgan Chase.
Craig, got another tweet question for you from LA. Tweeter wants to know, can Craig further explain as to why opium is worth U.S. military protection?
Because it's worth more than money. A lot of people understand that currency, the dollar, is a fiat currency. You can set it on fire. It doesn't make any difference. Why do you think we give away billions of dollars to our military personnel in every country that we invade and put a base? We put a base in Rwanda. We put a base in the Congo. We put a base everywhere. We put up hundreds of billions of dollars, fiat currency, in the hands of the military to bribe the most corrupt individuals to put them in power, and the good individuals that fight it, that form a group, and they say, no, we're going to throw the bad guy out. We don't want the American dollars. We tag them as criminals and terrorists. But why opium? Why heroin? Why cocaine? It's worth more than money. It's easily transportable. You don't have to print it. There's no accounting necessary. Don't you remember the stories when we invaded Iraq, where suddenly an Australian newspaper said there was over $100 billion shipped by tanker into Iraq, and it all disappeared? And the Pentagon said, well, it's difficult to keep an accounting of such things. Really? I was in the military. The one thing the military does really, really well is they account for every bullet, every dollar, every soldier. But when billions of American dollars disappear, they say, I don't know where it went. Why is cocaine? Who makes more money on cocaine than cocaine dealers? You think it's the dealers? You think it's the people that create cocaine in Colombia and Mexico? And then if we destroy the crops in one country, like in Peru, they move to Bolivia. They just keep creating more and more cocaine. Well, who makes the money? Who makes the money for on the cocaine? Who made the money, the real money, on that ship that was busted, owned by J.P. Morgan Chase? I've got the proof. It was in the testimony in the State Department's hearings on illegal drug trafficking. Ann Roblensky was the chair, and she talked to the DEA head of the cocaine trade in Colombia and Mexico. And she said, who makes the most money? Where's the real profit? Is it the drug dealers? He didn't know. Well, is it the people that traffic drugs into this country? The drug dealers in Los Angeles? He didn't know. then who's making the most money? He said the pharmaceutical companies like DuPont and Eli Lilly, where George Bush Sr. sat on the board of directors. That's who makes the real money, because they supply the precursor chemicals to make the cocaine, which couldn't exist without Eli Lilly and DuPont. They have factories and facilities and warehouses in all those countries, and they sell the precursor chemicals right off the docks of their buildings and warehouses in those countries. But instead of one 55-gallon drum of, acetone or potassium permanganate, or just go look up the list of precursor chemicals for cocaine. All of those chemicals are supplied by mostly U.S. Western multinational pharmaceutical corporations, and they have shops in every one of those countries, and they'll sell a 55-gallon drum that would otherwise go for $3 in the open market. They'll sell it for $700, $800, $2,000, and the drug cartels pay it because they don't have it. Only DuPont and Eli Lilly has it. And then when we want to fight a drug war, we go to Eli Lilly and say, well, how do we destroy these crops? And they force them to have to, do more. We got to fight this drug war. Eli Lilly came up with the product.
Craig, because I got another tweet question for you. Tweeter wants to know, is it true that a number of immigrants that were promised citizenship once they signed up for the service, and now they're being kicked out of the country without being given their citizenship? Is this going on quietly?
Yes. It's absolutely true. In fact, if they join, sometimes 60% of everybody that enlists in the U.S. Army in any given year, at sometimes the number is 60% are Mexicans and Filipinos that come to America and they join the military to become citizens. If they serve 6 years, they're supposed to become citizens. Most never become citizens. And if they get shot and killed in a war in the Middle East, their bodies are shipped back to Mexico. They're not even given a military funeral. And their families that are living on base with them suddenly find themselves designated illegal immigrants, and they're going to be rounded up and deported. But at times, 60% of all the new enlistees that join the United States Army and the Navy, as many as 60%, are largely from Mexico, and they would otherwise be illegal aliens.
So what does that say? Because you say the next conflict could be a conventional war, ground boots on the ground, and if most of these folks are fighting for us as foreigners, how's that going to work out?
Not well. Right now, we've got Mexicans that are serving in the United States Army that have served 6 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're still not American citizens. And if they die, they will be shipped back home to Mexico. So yes, you can envision very easily a bunch of Mexicans and Filipinos. And the Filipinos, for some reason, they enlist. They join the Navy because they're really good swimmers and they know a lot about ships and boats. So the Filipinos make up a large number of new Navy recruits. But the Army is largely Hispanic from all the countries, not just Mexico, all the countries, Guatemala, everywhere, Brazil. And they come to America and enlist. And yeah, if we go into a conventional ground war with Russia, there will be what would otherwise be illegal Mexicans fighting Russians in the Ukraine over oil, gas pipelines, fresh water, deep water ports that the corporate world wants control of. And they want to destroy the infrastructure of both America, Russia, and China to bring them completely into the fold of the corporate empire. No nation state is allowed to remain. Right now, it's just Russia, China, and the United States. No other country matters. All other countries have joined the World Trade Organization. They've sold out the sovereignty of their own citizens. And so has the Supreme Court of the United States. They enshrined the corporation as a natural citizen in the Supreme Court ruling.
So Craig, the Chinese, I understand they're dumping their real estate in the States. Is that true? They're pulling the money out?
They're anticipating a backlash from the American people because I would put it at probably a third, but it might be as high as a half of all the arable land and freshwater land, ranches, farms that have been taken over by corporations have also been bought up by the Chinese, the Russians, Ukrainians, totalitarian regimes that print money just like we do. Their money is good. The World Bank doesn't care if it's yen, yuan, dollars. They don't care. I was told by a Hollywood director once that, yeah, Craig, if you help us up on this movie, maybe a few shekels will roll down the hill. Shekels? Shekels?
Well, Craig, I hear the drummers rolling. We got to leave. But before we do that, how can folks reach you? How can, if they need more information on some of the topics that we talked about, how can they get to you?
CraigVHulet.com. At least take a look at the back cover of the book. Maybe you'll begin to see the world in a little bit different light than the crazy man in the White House.
All right, thanks, Craig. We got to run. We're running late. Folks, thank you for staying with us. Check us again tomorrow, 4 o'clock, right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.